Watching these rehearsals today, my eyes dazzle to have a first look at a ballet I have never seen before, and I was quite impressed at the choreographic richness and the sheer choreographic variety of it, and makes me wonder about the rest of the ballet. And since one of the last things that I saw before we sat down to talk was the fortune-telling scene in which you coached Lourdes Lopez as the ice fairy disguised as a gypsy, I was fascinated by the sheer violence of that choreography, the sheer fire that goes into that scene. And that made me wonder, what is the rest of the choreography for the fairy like? How does it be? What's she like at the start, and what does she become at the end?
Well, she comes in the very beginning, the first scene, in a carriage, actually, with a wand. And she arrives, and she gives the wand to an attendant. And then it's a snowstorm. It's very beautiful. And she goes, and there's this baby in swaddling clothes. And she looks at the baby. She slowly picks it up, and the fairy's kiss, gives a kiss to the fairy. And for some reason or other, when I danced this, I had like a shadow in back of me. Helen Kramer was a shadow.
Yes, right.
In black. I was all in white, shimmering white, and she was in black, like the shadow following. And she kisses the baby and leaves. And then her next entrance is what you saw today, disguised as a gypsy, come to find the child the baby that she kissed, and she finds him. And then the third scene of hers is that beautiful None But the Lonely Heart, which is, you know, you just cry.
Lovely.
And I had a beautiful white, like the same fairy dress, but in this, at the end, I wore a veil. I came in at the beginning in a veil, down, you know, beautiful. That's those slow steps again, which Balanchine does so poetically. And then becomes the music. He looks at me and takes the veil off. And the veil, much like in Orpheus, where the harp is part of it's like pas de trois, the veil somehow takes a great deal in None But the Lonely Heart.
I gather it's bride. I think it's the bride. Isn't he supposed to think it's the bride?
He thinks so.
Yeah, and it turns out to be the ice fairy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Who has come back. And so it's a very rich role, and for me, as a young dancer, it was a very important part of my career. And Mr. Stravinsky conducted that opening.
Our opening night.
It was with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and Stravinsky was there, and of course Balanchine was there, and it was a very exciting night.
It was, yes.
And Danilova was the bride, and it was I would say a scintillating performance.
What are some of the other interesting scenes in the ballet? Like, what is that snowstorm like? Is it any way like a snowstorm in Nutcracker? Or is
very, very much.
It's like
yes.
And they even
Very
had
similar.
the little wands.
We had, they were like stars with pom-poms on the end. And our hats were all pom-poms, snows, you know. Yeah,
It was that was a big scene.
Big.
The scene, that was a lot of choreography there, a lot. Then after that, we came to the village square, and that was very sort of Tyrolean in a way, with all the stomping,
like a character dance.
It was a real character dance. And in the midst of all this, he arrives. And in that, I remember when in that scene when you came on, and I remember Daniva looking over to one side, and you came on, and you took my hand, and you looked around, and you ran off. Now, this was another entrance of yours, and you were then dressed as the gypsy.
Yes, yes.
And that's when you come looking for me, because you'd seen me already in that scene.
Yeah.
So it was really rich ballet.
It was a very dramatic,
Very
well,
dramatic.
for me, a very
Yes.
dramatic role. Choreographically speaking, except what I saw today was beautiful choreography, of course, but the pas de deux of the bride and groom is a choreographic masterpiece, I think. I mean, it was just one of George's great works.
Round about the time and slightly after that you did the Ice Fairy, you did, a couple of years later, the Firebird, and then you did the Swan Queen. All of these characters are creatures who are wild, somewhat remote. They're wild in different ways, but they're not quite human. Was it Mr. Balanchine who almost discovered this wild aspect of your dancing personality?
Don't forget, I was also the original Sugar Plum Fairy.
Okay, okay.
I was also the Sylph
Okay.
in Scotch Symphony.
Okay.
I was
Well, she's
he
remote.
also
She's
he
also
also
remote
did a
in a way.
beautiful pas de deux for me, Adagio in Bourrée Fantasque.
Okay.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yes, yes.
Very poetic. But this was Balanchine's genius. He brought out so much in each one of us. It wasn't just me, though it seems the major roles were for me at that time, and I was in the right place at the right time. But he choreographed, I mean, I'll never forget La Valse. When Vida was the middle of the three girls, and it's as if they were talking to each other with this
Yes,
beautiful,
lovely hands,
beautiful
lovely
Ravel
yes.
score. And it was so poetic, and it was so delicate. And, you know, it's so, well, he was a poet. And there it was. And later Tanny and Nikki and Frank Mancion,
Yes.
remember? But this he brought out, Jack. It was amazing what he could do. He saw in each of us that ability not only to be the fairy and the gypsy in Baiser la Fée, but, I mean, as completely opposite is the Sugar Plum Fairy.
Yeah.
Delicate. And then at one season, later with the New York City Ballet, he brought back Baiser la Fée, and he choreographed the Sylvia Pas de Deux for me.
Okay.
So those were two completely different kinds of roles. But it was just, you know,
Maria, were you in the company when he redid Baiser?
yes.
I mean, after
Oh,
this.
no, not the divertissement.
That's what I was
No,
thinking. No,
no.
you know, but there wasn't another version,
No,
was there?
no.
I
I had
see.
done a version in Paris, at the Paris Opera,
Uh-huh. Yeah, I
with
see.
Kaluzhny,
Uh-huh.
and then that was in 47, after 46, when we had done it with the Ballet Russe.
Right.
Then later, he did it for the New York City Ballet.
Yes, I remember. Yes, yes.
And that's the same year we did the Sylvia Pas de Deux.
Sylvia, right.
And one was with Magallanes, the other one, Sylvia, was with Herbert Bliss. Andre had not joined the company yet.
No, no.
But when he did join the company, then he
He
of
did
course,
it,
took over
did it.
these major roles.
So, Maria, when you did it in France, was it more or less like this?
Yes, yes,
It
yes.
was.
This, what we were doing today
Right.
was more or less, yes.
Yes. I was wondering whether it again had been gone
But
through
it's very possible that one complicated step, the second circle, the soutenu and the renversé,
Right.
I don't think would have been possible on the rake stage of
Yeah,
the
no.
Paris Opera. And it's very possible that I did do jeté en tournant,
Yes,
which is much easier
Yeah.
and gives the same effect,
Right.
you know.
Exactly.
But no, it was more or less the
the
same.
same.
But he kept changing the end.
I
all
was
the
going to
time.
ask about that because all the accounts of it say he changed the end several times, and it always gave people trouble. What were the endings? One was a net you had to climb or something.
Well, I did it. I was thrown on. The first time I ever did it was in 1940 with Tamara Tumanova and Shura, and Andre was out. And I really was not an understudy, but he said, why don't you come and learn it? So I learned the role. Well, one Sunday he called and said, Freddie, be in the theatre this evening, you're on. I didn't worry about too much, but I worried about the net.
Did you really literally have to climb it? What did you do on the net?
wait a
Where
minute,
were
wait.
you on the net, and where did
No,
you
no,
have
wait a minute.
Okay.
The net started from the footlights, and it went up to the top baton. The net, it's covered, the stage is covered with a net. And on the net, there's a projection of water. Now you start, and the squares of the net are this big, so the feet can fall through them. I climbed up this thing, right up, and at the top, there is Tumanova, who was doing it, and she kissed me, and then that was it. The curtain came down, then I had to get down. This was the worst part. Going up, I knew what I was doing, but rolling down. Then the terrible thing was, the curtain was down, they had to unhook this rope and let it go back. Then we all came on, and consequently the applause was dying.
Well, I
This
think
was sad.
The problem with the end of
It's-
Baiser de la
yes.
Fée, as opposed to Firebird, was the music in Firebird is great, with great, you know, I mean,
Power.
the wedding scene is wonderful musically, you know, it's like a trumpet call. But with Baiser de la Fée,
No.
it's just sort of, you know. In fact, I always felt that Baiser should have ended with None But the Lonely Heart.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always felt that.
Would have been.
I didn't think it needed the apotheosis.
No,
I
no.
didn't really. But maybe George felt he didn't want
No.
to
Cut
say
the
to
music.
Mr. Stravinsky,
Right, yes.
why don't we finish with
Right,
None But the
yes.
Lonely Heart?
Because when we did it at City Centre, we had scrims, do you remember?
Yeah.
And Maria used to lead me in and out of these scrims. And that's how that was brought about, and then the curtain came down on that one.
That's right.
So
But at the,
that's two endings.
at the Paris Opera, it was the net.
The net.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
fiendish
And in
net.
fact, I think I was up there. And I have acrophobia.
Yes, yes, and you know, to get up there,
It was awful.
terrifying of the Met, and she's standing, oh dear, no, well, there we are.
The whole problem of that ending made me make a phone call the other night. As you all know, the original choreographer of Baiser de la Fée back in 1928 was Bronislava Nijinská.
Yes.
And it was done for Ida Rubinstein's company, and then was later revived for Nijinská's own company back in 1934. So I made a phone call to Nina Yushkevich, who played the bride in the 1934 production, and I said, how did Nijinská end it? And she said, well, she couldn't quite remember because at that point she had to be on the floor with her head down as the despondent bride. But what she remembered is that all she could recall is the fairy just kept leading the young man in different kind of positions and postures about the stage. She can recall no special scenic effect, or certainly nothing like a net or anything that complicated. And I said, did it work? And she said, oh, I don't know, I guess it did. But every account of that ballet mentions the problem of ending it.
Well, this is why I think later he made just a divertissement, which I never saw.
It's a lovely work, that
Is it?
divertissement. And I'm wondering what the dancers you worked with today told you in the course of the coaching and conversation about, are any of the steps they learned today in that short divertimento from Baiser de la Fée? Did they tell you anything about
Well, we were doing the pas de deux.
Yes.
Nicole said, oh, she, that's just like what we do now, but that was one isolated step.
Because one thing I do remember is that in both the divertimento and what we saw today is the bridegroom lifts the bride, and she seems to be walking on air.
That's right.
That, yes,
Yes.
that effect
Yeah.
is in both. And one kind of effect, at least, that is in both is in 1972, when Balanchine first did it for the Stravinsky Festival, he gave it a happy ending. Then 2 years later, he added the Lonely Heart music. And it now ends unhappily with the characters that are the equivalent of the bride and the bridegroom being separate together. They're on stage together, but they cannot be together. They're on stage, and yet they're apart. And there is certainly a hint of that in the mill scene that we rehearsed today, in which the bride and the bridegroom are in the same room together, but because they have their backs to each other, they don't see each other, and they are...
It
Beautiful.
is lovely. It is
Beautiful. Port de bras,
all the porte-bras and things.
which he could use so beautifully, like in the Nutcracker pas de deux,
Yes,
in the
right,
middle
right,
of the
exactly.
da-da-da. You know, and you could see the juxtaposition of his hands and my hands, so beautiful, and the leaning toward each other.
That's lovely.
Beautiful. He used that
He
a
did
great
that so
deal.
beautifully.
For instance, in Ballet Imperial, you know, the pas de trois, when they all,
Yeah.
and the hands that go. Beautiful. You know, I think people sometimes forget that Balanchine had a beautiful port de bras. And he would say the hands, the arms are framing your face, and this was what was so important.
I noticed in the coaching today that you made a great point of port de bras and the use of the hands.
Well, I think because perhaps he was a pianist, you know, that perhaps he
was
had
conscious,
this.
wasn't he?
He was very conscious.
Conscious
In
of
fact,
that.
I know he even thought about the little children, how they should be taught. You know, sometimes you teach like this to hold your fingers. Then he finally thought, no, they should hold this.
That's
And
right.
then all they do is go like this, and that's the way you should hold your hand. But he would stop, and it was like we had to study his hands, and we had to be aware of this.
Now, you're a pianist as a young woman. Do you think that helped you be increasingly sensitive to Balanchine's use of port de bras?
Yes,
Oh, definitely.
yes.
Probably.
Very musical. very musical. This is the one thing I think that Balanchine really was attracted to Maria for her musicality, because she has a way of emphasizing and phrasing the music, which he really appreciated.
That's right.
Yeah. Speaking about his hands, about Balanchine's hands, remember in Serenade when the curtain goes up and the girls are all standing like this? And when it was first done for Warburg's farm, I think it was, and the girls were standing out there, and Lincoln Kirstein came and he said, you know, that looks like a Hitler salute. And so Mr. Balanchine said, well, the girls really should be hiding their eyes from the sun.
From the light.
So everybody else did this, and it changed the whole thing. And that's the way it is now. Rather than standing this way, the girls are this way. You know,
As if you were, you don't want
so
the light
this was
in
his
your
right,
eyes.
shading your eyes from the sun. But I thought that was so wonderful that he did that just like that.
Yeah.
You know,
About the time that the Ballet Russe revived Baiser de la Fée in 1946, he was also creating a ballet at that time that was known as Night Shadow, and now is called La Sonnambula.
Right.
And it's interesting that in both works, the hero seems obsessed with a mysterious woman, and indeed has to crawl around on the floor afterwards, after her in both of them. Now, you danced both of those roles. Are these characters in some ways cousins or spiritually related, do you think?
Well, I think, yes, I do think so. But the idea of the poet in Sonnambula or Night Shadow, when he was describing it to me, he said, you know, you're coming to somewhere, a party you're not invited, and they all wonder why you're there. And no one ever really knows why you're there. Then one aspect of it, he said, you know, and people will say there's entertainment. And he said to me, they will think that you brought those people in to entertain, but you have nothing to do with them either. And it was only seeing the coquette that really made him focus on anything about the ballet. And I remember there was 1 minute during it, and that entrance, and it was the slowest entrance in the world, and the shake hands, and then this, and the walk up, and the bow, and the nod, and then very slowly. You had to have a lot of stuff in order to keep that and keep an audience.
Presence.
Right, thank you, Dad. That was
You had
lovely.
it. I thought, what an entrance.
Yeah, it really was. And there she was down there, and then he said, as you bow, your head comes up, and then suddenly you see her. And that's just that. And then it was the magnet, and that was wonderful. It was wonderful. But there was some kind of relationship between the young man in this and that, because they're strange. They're strange characters.
What do you think the fairy may symbolize or mean, and what do you think the ballet as a whole means?
Well, Balanchine often said that, you know, you cannot tell really a story. How do you know somebody is the daughter of, you know, like in Romeo and Juliet or this or that? So I think probably what George did was take the essence of the story, and as you say, the wildness which he brings out certainly in the Gypsy, not in the fairy, but in the Gypsy role, and that change, which makes a great dramatic role for a dancer, as you could see today. Yeah. And I think that's what he thought. I mean, he always told the story, like when he created Serenade. You know, he said, oh, people have these wonderful thoughts, you know. Yes, yes. Oh, this, that, oh, and it's so mysterious. And he said, well, Bill Dollar couldn't see anyway, so I said, put your hand in front of his eyes. He says, you know, and this girl was always late to rehearsal, so I left it in the ballet. That's everybody's right. There, and she comes looking, finds her place. And it comes out to be very mysterious, and, you know, one probes one mind to find why. And it's the same thing. So if it leaves you with a thought of why this, why that, then he's succeeded.
But it seems to be in the ballet that the fairy is guiding this man or pushing this man towards some kind of destiny. And people who want to be fancy about Balanchine's symbolism can look in ballet after ballet after ballet, the story ballets and even some of the so-called abstract ballets, in which you have a figure which could be called a destiny figure or a fate figure or a figure of mystery.
No, this is true.
This is true, and at the end, you see, when the net was there was a reason. He did want to get back to the fairy.
Yes.
And the struggle was up the net to get to her.
Well, she had sealed his future with
My
a kiss.
future was already,
Yeah.
and then I had
It's
to go and
always
find it, and that was what that was.
Yeah.
But then the music dictated such a lot to him.
Well,
That was all.
but everything
And this-
was the music.
And the music as the ballet, as it changed. There are so many aspects of this ballet. From the character work to the classical work to the venomous lady to everything. I mean, it's all in it.
Right.
Except the end,
Well,
which was difficult. You know.
Did Balanchine in conversation, I know that he was said to be a religious man, did he ever talk in conversation about such things as
No.
fate or, no,
No.
never,
No.
no.
He did say one thing to me, that I should read the Sermon on the Mount.
Oh,
And War and Peace. That's exactly what he said. Frederic, go home and read them. Yes, he did.
well, no, he...
But otherwise,
Well,
no.
you know, his family, I think an uncle was very high in the religious order in Russia. He was very high
In the church?
Yes, very. So George was innately a very religious man, which
right,
which
yes.
I was so pleased that when for his funeral, we did go for 3 days, and we did hold candles, and we heard the chants, and so that's made us feel better. I felt. Yes. Yes. So.
In coaching the ballet, if you had the good fortune, and if it could be revived in its entirety, and you were all coaching it, what would you say, what would you tell a dancer cast in the role of the fairy? What stylistic qualities epitomize the essence of this role? What is the stylistic essence of the role of the fairy, as opposed to the role of the bride?
Well, I think choreographically it's completely different. I mean, just
yes.
completely. The bride's pas de deux, as you saw today, is not coquettish. He was never coquettish, but he had an essence of great charm and longing, because that's the way the music is. She wants to go here, no, she wants to go there, you know. And of course, the strength of the fairy as she enters, and it's very classical, her first scene. And then the walk with the heels, to demonstrate the wild quality and the strength of the gypsy. And indeed, the flinging. In fact, when I read my notes, I thought, couldn't have done that. I didn't throw Freddie away. But I did throw Freddie away.
Oh, indeed,
And,
indeed.
but it's you know, this is, I think, for instance, today, and none of us ever went up to George and said, well, now, what is my character supposed to be about? No, because he defined our character through his choreography because of the music. And that's all it was. And George he would never sit around and talk like this about ballet. You know that. He'd start talking about cooking or growing flowers, you know, anything but talking about ballet. But I find now, since I'm not the genius of Balanchine, it's necessary to explain him. It's necessary to talk about him and to make people, and these younger dancers, that they understand what he really was, the ones who really didn't work with him.
There are so many, Maria.
So many,
now.
yes.
There are so many.
Well,
And then, you know, in the first act, when the girls rush on, you know, with the bride came and she did with the girls, and then there was a lovely scene where he was given a gun. And they did lots of things, and she was shooting the gun, with all in the lovely choreography. This was a very classical piece, right in the middle of the other character that was going on, the characters. And then she ran off, and then that was when I was left on the floor, and on came the gypsy. That was what it was, you see. It was linked together very well indeed.
that's in the story, too.
Yes.
Yeah, all the hunting scene and everything, and the competition.
Remember the circles?
Yeah.
All the things, and all that, how they all went off, and just I was left
Yeah, right.
nothing.
Yeah.
It was really, I think it was one of the happiest roles I ever danced.